Hi, and thank you for tuning into the Nature Conversations podcast. I'm Dr Adam Forbes. I'm a forest ecologist who specialises in the restoration of New Zealand's forest ecosystems. This podcast isn't about me, however. The purpose of the Nature Conversations podcast is to capture knowledge and insights from remarkable people and to profile important issues for ecology and nature conservation. Todd Dudley is the president of the North East Bioregional Network in Tasmania, and he has been working as a Bush Regenerator in Australia for 40 years. Todd was a key initiator of the Skyline Tier Restoration Project, which is successfully applying assisted natural regeneration techniques to restore native forest across 2,000 hectares of radiata pine clearfells. Todd was very generous giving his time to speak on the Nature Conversations podcast, and who better to discuss landscape scale restoration in Tasmania with than Todd.
I was interested to go and have a look to see what was going on, and I noticed there was an area that had a small bushfire recently, and there's quite a lot of eucalypt regeneration occurring, so that's when I thought that there might be some potential for it to be restored to native forest rather than go into another rotation of pines. Being an ecological restoration or bush regeneration practitioner is being able to assess the resilience of the site, and then obviously by doing that, that's the way that you come decide on what is the most appropriate methodology to use. If you have well run and implemented ecological restoration projects, there's a whole range of different social and economic benefits that can also flow onto the local communities.
Well, I'm very, very happy to have Todd Dudley join us on the Nature Conversations podcast today. Hello, Todd. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks very much for joining the podcast. Todd, tell us about yourself in terms of your professional background and how you came to work in the field of restoration.
Well, I was fortunate enough that my interest in bush regeneration, which is another word for ecological restoration in Australia, coincided with it becoming quite popular in Australia, and at the time I was living in Sydney, and so in the early 80s, that's when bush regeneration really started to get some momentum in Sydney. There was a lot of councils and other organisations that were hiring, well, either councils had their own crews or they were hiring contractors to do bush regeneration work. So a lot of it started from back in the late 60s and early 70s with the Bradley sisters, who were kind of the pioneers of bush regeneration in Sydney, and they even developed their own method called the Bradley method. And so, yeah, I was just lucky that my interest I had a fair, I like working outside, and I had a strong interest in the environment. And so, fortunately, I got employed by a local council. And mainly to start off with, it was just an unemployment scheme actually, but we had a change of general manager at the time, and he wanted to start having a council bush regeneration crew, so I ended up being put in charge of that at the time. So so I've been doing bush regeneration for nearly 40 years now.
Oh, that's great, Todd. And what's your current role?
I'm involved in quite a lot of different organisations, but main one is I'm president of the North East Bioregional Network. So that's a conservation group that I started about 20 years ago. And we do a range of different things. We do some advocacy work, some land use planning things, some environmental education, and quite a lot of ecological restoration. And I'm also involved with the Lake Pedder Restoration Committee, which has an aspiration to restore Lake Pedder, which is I don't know whether it'll ever happen, but it's a huge ambition, that's for sure. And I'm involved in a few other groups, but mainly the president of the Bioregional Network is my most active role.
And I understand one of the projects that you've been involved with and are involved with is the Restore Skyline Tier project. Would you mind telling us about that project?
Back in the 1960s and early 70s, the Australian federal government invested a lot of resources into establishing radiata pine plantations in Australia, mainly in southern parts of Australia. And so the area at Skyline Tier, which is in northeast Tasmania behind the settlements of Scamander and Beaumaris, it's about 2,000 hectares. And so that was actually dry eucalypt forest, and it was converted to pine plantation back at that time. As with a lot of these programs, they're not necessarily that well thought out, and so it became pretty apparent after not very long that the site at Scamander was pretty, low quality in terms of the productivity side of it. Was fairly, nutrient poor soils and periodic droughts, and it's a long way to transport any timber for processing as well. So even within only a few years after the pines were established, they were actually established a little airstrip out there to fly around and aerial spray or disperse fertilizer in the hope that it might make the pines grow a bit better. But so it hasn't been all that successful. But basically what happened was in the early 2000s, the site's a lot of it's quite visible from a lot of different vantage points because it's quite a prominent tier in the area. And they were cable logging a lot of the coastal slopes at the time to harvest the pines, and created this massive scar on the landscape. And even people in the Sydney to Hobart yacht race could see it apparently. Anyway, I was interested to go and have a look to see what was going on, and I noticed there was an area that had been burnt in a small bushfire recently, and there's quite a lot of eucalypt regeneration occurring. So that's when I thought that there might be some potential for it to be restored to native forest rather than go into another rotation of pines. And so we started having some conversations with the company that was leasing the land at the time, because it's state forest, so it's owned by the government but leased to most public plantations in Tasmania, leased to multinational corporations who are mainly involved in superannuation. Anyway, they to start off with, they weren't that interested in doing that, but after about 4 years of persisting, they agreed to a trial site of 40 hectares, and then it's just kind of increased from there. And so the overall aspiration is to restore the whole 2,000 hectares of pine back to native forest, and so far we've done about 750 hectares.
Right. So what are the main restoration treatments that you've been applying to the site? Like what have you been needing to do up there to make things work?
Yeah. Well, the good thing about all the restoration that we've done is that it's there's no planting required, so we haven't planted one tree at all. So it's all based on an assisted natural regeneration methodologies, and just about all of the we do quite a lot of other restoration projects as well, which are not as big as Skyline here, but a range of different things, whether it's dunes or quarries or a whole range of different projects. But generally, as wherever possible, we use direct seeding or assisted natural regeneration techniques, because they're a lot more cost effective and you get much better survival rates and better diversity of species, and a lot less ongoing maintenance. And I guess that's also part of it is trying to select sites where that assisted natural regeneration and direct seeding are going to be more likely to succeed too. So so the main methodology has just been the pines are being harvested and then using for relatively hot ecological burns to do two things. So one, the most important thing is that there's a lot of Australian native plants are adapted to fire and can survive in the soil seed bank for decades. And then when there's a fire, they'll be germinated. And so that's what we've found at Skyline Tier, is that even though a lot of the areas were converted, 40 or 50 years ago, by burning, we're getting up to 150 species or more regenerating after the fires. And the other benefit of doing the burning is that it kills some of the pine wildling regrowth, because you do, as you probably know, after pine forest is harvested, you get a lot of wildlings coming up. And so burning kills quite a lot of the wildlings, not all of them, but some of them. And then the key reason why our project's been really successful is because we've done multiple follow-ups over all the sites to make sure that the pines don't come back. And that's where a lot of the a lot of restoration projects fall down is not having enough capacity or resources to do the amount of follow-up that you need to be successful. And there was a report on forest restoration in Tasmania done by Michael Schofield a few years ago, and he particularly pointed out that our project was the thing that set us apart from other forest restoration projects was the level and detail of the follow-up that we've been doing. Yeah, and so I suppose also with the methodologies, the other thing is that so not everywhere has been burnt. So if it's not burnt, it just means you have to do more follow-up. So there's more pine regrowth. Another thing that we've done in some areas too, especially where there's remnant patches have been left, we've got logging contractors to go through and selectively remove the pines and leave the native trees. And in some patches, if it's too difficult for them to do that, then we do it, by hand, either using handsaws and loppers or having chainsaw contractors do the work. But the main thing, I guess, is that most important thing is that the natural regeneration's been really good, so we haven't had to do any planting, and a lot of the areas are after 5 or 10 years, you wouldn't ever even think that there'd ever been any pines there, so it's really encouraging.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear about the resilience, Todd, and that the site can bounce back after so much disturbance.
So, yeah, I was just going to say it's good that you mentioned resilience, because that's obviously a really important skill with being an ecological restoration or bush regeneration practitioner, is being able to assess the resilience of the site. And then obviously by doing that, that's the way that you come decide on what is the most appropriate methodology to use.
So what's the long-term plan for management of the land?
So we've still got quite a long way to go, obviously, because it's a huge area. So at the moment, there's about 700 hectares that's been harvested in the last 5 years. And we've started, we're working through those areas at the moment, and probably about 75% of those areas have got really good regeneration. So it won't take a huge amount of work to get them back into good condition. There's some areas where there's pines are a bit denser, where that'll take a bit more time. So that's probably our main priority at the moment. And we're also at the moment in the process of trying to negotiate the forest right for the whole plantation to be transferred to us from the company that's currently has the lease. So that's pretty exciting. But the biggest challenge, obviously, with whatever your plans are, is to make sure that you've got enough funding to be able to keep doing the maintenance work that's required. And that's really challenging, obviously, when it's always been a bit of a problem in on-ground conservation to have enough resources to be confident that you're going to have what you need year after year. So anyway, we just keep working on that and trying to get more interest wherever we can. I guess just on that too, there has been a bit of a trend over the years with the project, from starting off mainly as a voluntary project, then being able to access some fairly significant funding from federal government sources, and then that's dried up to a reasonable extent, especially over the last, say, 10 years. And so we've had to look more and more towards private sources for funding. So, yeah.
How has the project related to people or the community?
It's been interesting from that point of view, because I suppose since we first started talking to the company until now, it's nearly 20 years. So it's been quite a long project, and probably still going to be a lot longer yet, hopefully, assuming that we can keep the resources going to keep it going. It's really been interesting too, because I suppose for a long time when I was doing ecological restoration, I was really mainly only interested in the ecological side of it, and the biodiversity benefits and all those kind of things. So, and that's still my main priority. But what's been apparent from doing this project is that if you have well run and implemented ecological restoration projects, there's a whole range of different social and economic benefits that can also flow onto the local community. So we've employed 80 people over the period of time that we've been doing the project out there, and so that's created quite a lot of local employment for people in the area, and quite often that's been also included providing some training for people as well, so doing some recognised courses through TAFE, which is like practical conservation land management units that are nationally recognised, so people are also getting some recognised skills. So yeah, the employment training aspect of restoration is really important, especially in rural and remote communities where there's quite a lot of there's a lot of younger people, especially that are unemployed, and there's lack of opportunities. So, and a lot of people like doing outdoor practical work, so there's a lot of good synergies there for running ecological restoration projects that have really good environmental benefits, but also have social and economic value as well. And that's certainly been the case with our project. And it's certainly, that was something that became apparent to me over, the 20 years that we've been involved in the project, is that economic and social aspect. And that's important too, because it does help to provide broader community support for what you're doing as well. Yeah, so it's really important. And I think it's, in some ways, when we talk to politicians, for example, sometimes when we're looking to try and get funding support, we'll promote the fact that in some ways, you could look at a ecological restoration project as being a community development program, because it's actually addressing a whole lot of different needs that are unmet in rural and remote communities.
Yeah, great point, Todd. What has flowed on from the project? Has it provided confidence in the style of assisted natural regeneration in Tasmania? Are there other restoration projects that have led on from it?
Well, we certainly, we've got a lot of good recognition over the years for the project. Won a lot of awards. Like, for instance, in 2021, we won the Society for Ecological Restoration's Best Ecological Restoration Project in Australasia, and also that same year we won a forestry award for environmental excellence, which is probably the first time that a conservation group's ever won a forestry award. So that was interesting. And the methodology that we developed has been used by the company that we're working with and others in other parts of Tasmania too, to some extent. Another thing that's flowed on from it, I guess, is that it made me realise that in Tasmania, that restoring plantations back to native forest is probably the biggest opportunity for landscape scale restoration in Tasmania, because a lot of the plantations were established by converting native forest in relatively recently. So there's still a fair level of ecological resilience in a lot of sites. So we did do a report in, I think it was 2015, identifying that opportunity and sites around Tasmania where that could be applied. But at this point, it hasn't probably expanded as much as I'd like to see. But a lot of it comes down to money in the end, unfortunately. But there's definitely significant opportunities there, because compared to other, for instance, if you're looking at agricultural areas, they don't have very much ecological resilience, so you're virtually stuck with tree planting and at best. And like I said before, the fact that having large-scale restoration projects in remote and rural communities can be really have a lot of economic and social benefits for the local community, as well as providing for a much healthier and more biodiverse environment. And I probably should say just about that too, that on the ecological benefits, that like one of our strongest focuses is on landscape connectivity. So most plantations in Tasmania actually have pretty good landscape context. They're often surrounded by native forests, so that's a plus obviously for restoration, but it's also good for landscape connectivity. And this site's also really important because it contains a number of short coastal catchment, virtually the whole upper and middle catchments of a whole lot of coastal waterways in the area, which lead to high value coastal wetlands. So there's really important water quality values that through the restoration we're doing. And then there's a whole range of different threatened plants and animals and threatened vegetation communities that are all part of the benefits that we're realising. So there's a lot of pluses. Yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous, Todd. What's your most memorable moment working on the project? Has there been something that really stands out to you as being memorable in your involvement?
Just enjoying the how all the forest is coming back and all that, the life and beauty that's being created, and that's probably the most enjoyable and memorable thing about it, is just really pretty much every time we go out there, it's just seeing how things are improving all the time.
What a privilege it has been to speak with Todd Dudley. Todd described the starting point of the Skyline Tier Restoration Project as a site visit where he noticed eucalypt regeneration in a radiata pine clearfell. From this observation, the initial 40-hectare trial was obviously compelling, and the project expanded to 750 hectares, with sites now on 2,000 hectares of restoration. A main factor making this award-winning project possible is the underlying resilience of the ecosystem, and therefore the possibility of restoration following assisted natural regeneration techniques. Todd explained that assisted natural regeneration means a more cost-effective approach, better survival, better representation of species, and a lower ongoing maintenance. And not a tree has been planted in restoring the Skyline Tier. Todd went on to explain that restoring ex-plantations back into native forest is the largest opportunity for landscape-scale restoration in Tasmania, due to the opportunity of large-scale restoration coupled with favourable ecological resilience and high levels of proximity to native forest. One point that interested me was Australia has a structure for practitioners to be trained and working on the topic of forest resilience, which of course is a precursor to the practice of assisted natural regeneration. This example gets me thinking that New Zealand should also offer formal training in identifying forest regeneration and resilience so that we can better support decisions for assisted natural regeneration. Mainstream restoration could then move beyond focusing on simply planting and growing trees. Finally, Todd outlines a range of social and economic benefits that flow from restoration at the Skyline Tier into the local community, and these opportunities are being especially relevant to rural and remote communities. Todd sets the scene for an exciting paradigm where ecological restoration projects are framed as community development projects, which address a range of needs in rural and remote communities. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, I think there is clearly a lot we can learn from Todd and the Restore Skyline project. Keep up the great work, Todd Dudley, and everyone involved with and supporting the Restore Skyline Tier project.